Hello, this is Lynn Langit for All Things Data, and today I'm going to talk about using SQL Server data tools. This is an update to a previous presentation that I did to reflect some of the new changes and additions to the data tools, but if you didn't watch that one, I'll also be covering the basics. So let's get started. First, a little bit about me. I work in Microsoft technologies, Google, NoSQL, and Hadoop technologies as a technical trainer and a practicing big data architect. I used to be an employee at Microsoft, and I've been doing work on all of these various stacks. So as we start to work with SQL Server data tools, let's get a high level of what this is. In this screencast, I'm going to focus on Visual Studio 2012 integration. However, SSDT will work with Visual Studio 2010 and also detail how that goes as well. It's a set of tools and services around the software development lifecycle for databases. It also encapsulates what was the Business Intelligence Development Studio and more. And as I mentioned, it's integrated into Visual Studio. An aspect of it, which is called a DACPAC, is integrated into SQL Server Management Studio and into Azure. And I'll be showing all of these during the screencast. So now that we've heard the what, let's take a look at the why you might want to take a look at these tools and try them out. And I've been increasingly giving this demonstration that I'm recording for actual customers. It's one of the reasons I'm creating it, because I'm finding a lot of these pain points exist very commonly out there in the wild. So the first is a database schema synchronization. And the driver is something like, hey, it works on my dev box, my solution, why doesn't it work on production? So I've seen various implementations of this in the wild. Most of the time people just use SQL scripts. Sometimes they'll use other third-party tools, which are also great, and I'll talk about at the end. But one of the great aspects of SQL Server data tools is that it's absolutely free. So if you're just using SQL scripts, there is a sort of better answer here that we'll look at. Another thing is data synchronization itself. I sometimes run into the question, why are the report results incorrect when I'm running on my, for example, staging environment, when it's just supposed to be a duplicate copy including data of production. So there's data synchronization tools in SSDT as well. Refactoring, if I change the name of a table or a column, what's going to break in the code? And then addition and version targeting. What are the features that are unique to SQL Azure? What features are deprecated in various versions of SQL on-prem? If I've got an environment with 2008 and 2012, what's going to work, what isn't? How do I keep this stuff straight? So there's more, but those are the most common pain points that cause me to show SSDT to customers. So SSDT itself is really two things. It includes what's shown in yellow here, the database services around the database lifecycle management, and then it includes Business Intelligence Development Studio. And why that's so important is because the release cadence has been confusing, and one of the reasons I'm making this screencast is I see a lot of questions on Stack Overflow and different places of people, how do I get the tools and what's what and how do I work with it? So I'm going to try to clarify that here. But from a high level, they're two separate pieces. So to get started, you would do one of two things. If you're using Visual Studio 2012, you do have a part of SQL Server data tools, the database services or the yellow, what was shown in yellow in the last slide, already in the product. If you're using Visual Studio 2010, you have to download the core portion. For both of them, you do have to download the business intelligence section, and you'll probably also want to download some of the new enhancements around DACPACs. So this is the location. You just search on SQL Server Data Tools and you click on Get It. And then it'll look like this. And this is, I'm recording this in July 2013. You can see there was a update as of June 2013 that contained improvements around data compare. It was the introduction of data compare, build and deployment contributors, extensibility API, and updated DACPAC framework. So that is also a separate download. So you can see here's the downloads. And notice you have the two-part download for 2012, the BI tools for 2012. So again, drilling down, the core download is included in 2012 for 2010. Visual Studio, you download it. For bids, you have to download it for both of them. And then there are updates which you have to download, which are around Data to Application Framework that just came out. So let's start with DACPAC and BACPAC. They are types of zip files, so they are containers for other files, and DACPAC is really where it began. The idea is it's a versionable or a versioned container for database schema and more. Database schema you can think of as your SQL scripts, your DDL. BACPAC includes a BCP of your data, so that's where the B comes from in BACPAC. They were originally designed to work with SQL Azure, and as you're going to see in the demonstrations, the functionality is most built out to migrate on-premise SQL Server apps to SQL Azure. So in other words, it doesn't work for everything on-prem to on-prem, but that is in the roadmap. Even when I was still an employee a year and a half ago, that was in a roadmap, so I assume it still is. So let's get started with a demo. So I'm going to start actually by working with DACPACs, these containers in Management Studio, because that's typically where the lifecycle will begin. Doesn't have to be, but it often is. So here I am in Management Studio for SQL Server 2012. You can see it's SQL Server 11, and I've got an on-prem edition of SQL Express. It really doesn't matter what version you have. Also, it goes back a couple versions, I think, to 2005. So I'm just going to take a very simple database here called Books, and I'm going to right-click on it and go to Tasks. And then you'll notice I have a whole bunch of stuff in addition to the Generate Scripts. Now, most of my customers are still just using scripts unless they're using some third-party tools. But now we can sort of go to a higher level and we can extract as a data tier application or a DACPAC. We could deploy directly to SQL Azure. We could export a data tier application, which I'll show you the differences when we run the wizard. We could register, and this would be as if we were using the enterprise version of SQL Server, and we could monitor DACPACs for changes to schema, and then we could upgrade. So if a developer worked on a schema, generated a new DACPAC, and handed it back to a DBA, then they could upgrade production server based on that. So let's start with extracting. So everything's wizard driven here, and you can see it says what it does. So basically, you're going to extract a DAC from an instance of SQL Server to a DACPAC. So you're just going to go through and say, okay, you have an app name. This is really important, the version name and the description. And I'll just say test for YouTube. And then where this is going to be located, and I'm just going to put this in a location where I can find it. So I'll put it inside Documents and just put it inside of here. Notice it's a DACPAC. I can say overwrite existing yes or no. And then it's going to check here to see if all of the features of the database are buildable in a DACPAC. When this technology first came out, it was specifically for SQL Azure, which was at that time a very small subset of what SQL Server was. So a lot of the DBAs really poo-pooed DACPACs and said, you know, they don't work with so many of the features for on-prem, it's not really usable, which is a valid thing. But as more and more of the features are included, they become more interesting for on-prem and cloud scenarios. So notice we have a success, and we're going to say finish. And now if we wanted to look at this, we would just go out and we would go to the location, and we would have this DACPAC, which should be in here. And here it is. And I can right-click it and I can unpack it. And if I unpack it, then inside of here, what I've got is I've got metadata, model, and then inside of here I have all the SQL from the Books database. And you can see it's nice and clean, okay? One of the useful options of DACPACs is that we'll generate a script for all supported objects in SQL Server. So not just tables and views, but things like whatever, and I really honestly haven't checked the documentation to see what's supported, but the plan is to support everything. So, anything in sequences, any of the new 2012 things will all be eventually supported. Also, security policies if you're doing policy-based management. So now, if I wanted to work with that DACPAC, what I could do, again under tasks here, is so I did an extract, and you saw what that did. Now if I said export, what would happen is the wizard will help you export schema and data. So extract is just the schema, export is schema and data, and notice that it does that to a BACPAC format. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And notice I can save this to a local disk, or I can save it to Windows Azure. And if I'm saving it to Windows Azure, then I'm going to save it out to blob storage. And the reason for this will become clear when we move over to the portal. But for right now, I'm just going to save it to the local and I'm just going to call it Books BACPAC. And if I go inside of here, I can actually select which of the objects. I don't really care about sys diagrams, so I'm going to just say OK on that, and next. And it's saying that the file exists, so I'm going to overwrite it because I did it once before, and finish. And notice, see, in addition to exporting the schema, it now exports the data. Okay, so that's the difference between a BACPAC and a DACPAC, and export and extract. So now if we go here, and then I say deploy to SQL Azure, then I can take this and deploy this to SQL Azure. So I have to make a connection to SQL Azure, and I've got that set up right here. And then I say, okay, I want a new database called Books, and notice it's going to create a temporary BACPAC again. This is really an important metaphor if you're going to work with SQL Azure at all, because it's not backup and restore, it's import export BACPACs, or DACPACs if you want just schema, BACPAC if you want data. And then we'll say finish. And again, we get the same process, but notice here we're creating the database on target, and then we're going to be deploying this onto the target. Now, I'm working with DACPACs through clicking inside of Management Studio. One of the interesting things about this, and I'll just scroll down and show you it succeeded, is that this is a application programming framework. And this is another reason I decided to make this screencast, because with this recent update to DAC, we now have DACFX, so you can actually program against this and create your own interface. You can use PowerShell, you can script this kind of thing. So it is sort of an important part of the managing inside of here. And here I have a connection in Management Studio to my SQL Azure instance. And inside of here, you can see there I have the Books database. Okay, so that gives you a kind of an idea of how you can work with DACPACs in Management Studio on-prem, and then back and forth with SQL Azure. Just to be complete, I'll just right-click here, and you can see you get a subset of tasks, but we do have this full support, and by that I mean a subset of options versus the on-prem. But we do have this very full support for working with DACPACs. So just important part of the Microsoft tool set. So here is some details about the DACFX, which was just released last month, and I'm just going to go ahead and read them out so you can follow. So it's we know what DAC is. We saw how that worked on Management Studio. We'll see how it works in Visual Studio in just a minute. So it's for deployment and management scenarios. You can extract or export live databases to DAC or BACPACs. You can deploy them. You can migrate on-premise SQL Server to Windows Azure, meaning Windows SQL Azure. And then you have this command line tool, which I'm not going to demonstrate, called SQL Package to create DACPAC and BACPAC. It does require Visual Studio 2012, and one little note I got from the installation is on a x64, you need to install both x86 and x64. I'm going to show you how to get SQL Server data tools for Visual Studio 2012. To do that, you go to this URL over here, which is just this URL shown, msdn.microsoft.com, WAC-en-US, WAC data, WAC tools, SPX, and you go to get it. And if you click over to here, you can see download the data tools as I showed you in the screenshots. So you're going to download the appropriate tools. And then you also are going to want to download the update as well. So once you have SQL Server data tools, it's a little bit confusing to see whether or not they are part of Visual Studio. And I've read quite a lot of blog posts and questions on forums of, did it install? Do I have it? What are the parts and pieces? So one of the first things is you will see that there's a new Explorer view inside of Visual Studio, and it's called SQL Server Object Explorer. So if you have that, then you do have the core SSDT, which you should because it's part of 2012. Now if you have Visual Studio 2010, you have to download that. Okay? Inside of there, you'll be able to connect to any version of SQL Server. I think it's 2005 up, including SQL Azure. And you'll have this new thing called Local DB that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail as we go along. So next, let's take a look at working with SSDT in Visual Studio. So here I have a Visual Studio 2012, and let's start with the Server Explorer, because this is not really new. There's some things around Azure that are new, but before SSDT, we would typically connect to SQL Server by doing a data connection, which Still works, by the way. But really there's very little reason to do that anymore because all you get is kind of a lightweight view of data connections. The only reason you'd want to do this is if you're connecting to something other than SQL Server, you know, any of these other things here. So if you're connecting to SQL Server, what you'd rather do is you would rather go to View and SQL Server Object Explorer or Control / if that's how you have your keyboard mapped. And then you would have this new viewer. So inside of here you have two sections. You have SQL Server and you have projects. Now you're going to have something called local DB that comes with Visual Studio, and this is something like SQL Express, but it's not SQL Express. It's more lightweight. And it is, you know, I've seen it again, lots of confusion. The idea is very analogous to having Cassini rather than IIS in Visual Studio, where you have this lightweight process which encapsulates the database functionality so that you can write your code against it without having to install an Express instance or having SQL Server per se that you can connect to or on your machine. So let's start by looking at our connection, because let's say we want to start with a live connection, even though you really wouldn't have to. So to make a connection, you just right click and you say add SQL Server. So it's nothing new there. And you can add, you know, your particular server, or you can add a cloud-based server on SQL Azure. But we'll just start with on-prem. So inside of here, you have a subset of what you see in Management Studio. So a common question is, okay, so is this so developers won't work in Management Studio? Is Microsoft like abandoning Management Studio or something? No, the idea is that developers will be more productive if they just work in one environment. So, you know, if you have Management Studio, you might choose to still work in it. But as you're going to see, a lot of the core functionality that you do as a developer is replicated here. So you might just try this out. So let's do the connected functionality first. So the scenario is you are working against a live database here. And so here's our books database. And we have our, you know, we have our tables. And inside of here, we want to, for example, view the data. We can do that just like in Management Studio. We could put more data in here. Same thing. I'm not sure if this is an ID field or not. I'll find out in a minute, because it would give me an error. Nope, it's not. Okay, and then so I can manipulate data if I have permission, of course. I can view the code. Notice it's retrieving a definition from the server. And here's my code for the table. I can make a change to that. I could add a new table if I wanted to. So I could right click right here, add new table. And now you'll see something a little bit interesting here. I'm going to make this a little smaller so you guys can see it. This design surface was created to reflect how developers work. So you have common metaphors, like you can type in the box here, but notice it shows up on the bottom. So you also, if you would prefer, if it's faster for you, can do this and say, notice how it, now notice right now it's showing you an error because it's design time validation. It says you can't have two columns of the same name, which is good to know. And then we can just change that, and notice now it stays in sync. And this is a common sort of design thing here. Now if I want to change the name from table, let's call it junk table. And notice over here also you have some common activities. So if you want to put an index, you just right click, add new, and then it has all the various indexes that are supported in SQL Server, you know, things like spatial XML, selective XML. But we're just going to do a, you know, a normal index, and junk table column has a name on it, and it stubs it out. And notice again it shows us, okay, this is an error because what column do you want it on? Again, I'm just kind of doing junk stuff here, so this is not reflective of, you know, super good indexing pattern. And in here I could then change the name to reflect it. And it's just, again, it's just to make it a little bit easier for you. Now, you'll notice when I save this, something interesting is going to happen. So here I've got this new table. It doesn't show up over here, and I said I'm connected live. So what happens when I save this? So I'm saving it, and it tries to save it as a what? It tries to save it as a script. Now this is a really common and well-designed part of this, is that everything in Visual Studio is saved as a script. Now you can apply changes directly to the live databases or to a copy of it, but the default is to save things as a script. So the reason I'm fumbly on this is because I don't normally work live. I'm just going to get rid of this and say no. I don't even want to save it. Maybe I'll say yes, see what it does. That's what I always wants to do, script. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of this and say no. Rather, what I would do, rather than working live, is I would make a local copy in Visual Studio that is disconnected. Now I'm going to show you a couple steps of how this works. So you right click right here, and notice before we even do that, you can publish this thing as a data tier application or extract it or register it. That's why I started with DACPACs, because this concept of DACPAC is really fundamental to SSDT. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new project, and what that's going to do is that's going to create an offline copy into Visual Studio as a project. Now notice I could add it to my existing solution as a data tier, or I could create a new solution, and then I have import settings, and I'm going to get a folder structure of schema, an object type, and I could just say none and get everything at the top level, but this is the standard. Let's say start, and as I was saying, this is supporting more, the DAC framework is supporting more and more of the objects in SQL Server. So if you looked at it a couple years ago and you kind of poo-pooed it, you might want to look again, because you can see it captures roles, app roles. I mean, I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but you can see how much it captures out of the structure, which is quite a lot. So I'm going to click Finish. And now I'm actually going to get rid of this Object Explorer because I don't really need it. The only other thing I might show you is under projects. I do have it over here, but to me this is confusing. The way I look at it is the left hand is live development, which frankly I don't really do very much. I'll also show you here under local DB that there's going to be, this is another one, books copy. Do you see it? So this is because that's where this copy is actually running. But again, I think this is a little bit, I don't know, confusing. I use this left side for live, and I use the right side for disconnected. So I'm actually going to get rid of this. And so now I'm going to go over here, and you can see that inside of here I've got my 3 tables. So for example, let's say I'm going to work with my authors, and I'm going to add, I don't know, age or something like that. And I save it, and of course it stays in sync, and then I save it. Now notice when I'm working disconnected, unlike when I was working connected, it doesn't prompt me for a script. It just saves it because it's saving it into the local copy, if you will. Now, once you have this local copy, what you can then do is you can save its state over time, first of all. So to do that, I have to first build the project, and there it's built. And then I can take a snapshot of it. Now when I take a snapshot, notice it's a DACPAC file. And so now I have this snapshot that I can use to roll back to or compare to, or let's say I have multiple developers working, I can have portions of the schema snapshotted. So pretty handy usefulness. And also it is a pure DACPAC, so it could be brought back into Management Studio. So now I'm going to go ahead and make a new table like I did before when I was connected, and I'm going to call it junk table. Say add. And here I've got the design interface, and I'll just say name. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and save it. Again, not prompted for a script. Now I'm going to build again. And what I can do is if I had been working all day and I can say, I can't really remember all the changes, or I'm not really sure because maybe I'm building an application against this, I can do a schema compare. And I think this is one of the really great features of the SSDT, very useful. So by default it loads up the current project, and then you can do a schema compare to another project. So you could pick another project, but that would be redundant sort of. You could do it to a live database, so any database you can connect to, including cloud, or you can do it to a DACPAC. Okay, so what I needed to do was I needed to find the location, which I copied. So now I'm going to just go select target, and then I'm going to go data tier application and go over here and then paste the path in, which I just found by looking for the containing folder, and then I'll select this book's copy, and then I'm going to go ahead and run this compare. And what this will do is this will compare all the objects. And of course, obviously, we have the junk table, which was added since I started working with this. Now what's really interesting, and of course what I could do is I could make a change if I wanted to. And how I would do that, notice update is grayed out, is I would generate a script. And the reason is I can't update this DACPAC because it's a file basically. So if I click over here, it will give me a script. So there's my script, okay, and there's my table. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that if I change the comparison here, let's say that I want to compare, I want to clear this, and I want to take the, well, I guess I'll take this. I'll take the project, and I want to compare this to the live database. Because remember, we made that change to the authors table. I'll go back and compare this. Might have to make the new connection. And here now I'm comparing what I have in this project so far to the live database, and I'm going to run a compare. And now we can see that we have that one column that's different, and we also have this table that's different. Okay? But because we are connected back to that live database, if we have permission, we can actually immediately update it. So we could run that script again, but if we click update, you sure? Yes, I'm sure. And now it created that script, and it ran it, and we can view the results, and we can see that the authors table was altered and the junk table was created. Now, in addition to this, some other useful features inside of SSDT, and I'm just cleaning up my screen here a bit, is this version targeting. So I'm going to demonstrate that with the junk table. So the junk table right now has a primary key, and if I right click on the project and I go to properties, there are several interesting aspects of this. You can see right now I'm targeted for SQL Server 2012. I could target to Windows Azure SQL Database 2008, 2005. Okay, let's say I go ahead and I target to Windows Azure SQL Database, and I save that. Now if I go to my junk table and I remove the fact that this is a primary key, I just take that off, I save it, and then I attempt to build. I actually get a failure on the build now because junk table does not have a clustered index. Clustered indexes are required for inserting data in this version of SQL Server. Now, if I go ahead and I change this back to SQL Server 2012, and I save it, and I rebuild it, I do not get an error because, of course, clustered index are not required. So that's an example of the version targeting that is included, which I think is super useful as maybe you're migrating from one version or edition to another, or going to the cloud. Now, in addition to selecting your target platform, you can select your output types. So notice here comes our friend DACPAC again. And inside of here, you can set the version numbers. And of course, if you're using source control, which you should be, you can check this in and out of source control and have it versioned and commented. Notice also, if you are a purist and you want those SQL scripts, you can do that here. And you can go even more granularly by clicking on the database settings, and if any of these settings are important for your particular implementation. Notice how it's very, very, much the same as what you get in terms of options for SQL Server. Now, in addition to this, if you click on Build, you can specify the locations of the build files, the output file names, so for continuous integration, and how you're going to deal with T-SQL warnings and T-SQL warnings or errors. So you might wonder where this comes from and if you have control over it. So this is one area. Another area is under code analysis. Now code analysis is like an FX cop, but for ANSI SQL or T-SQL. So this will warn but not prevent build. So, one of my favorites, avoid the use of select star and stored procedures, views, and table valued functions. You can say whether you want that turned on and whether you want it set as an error or not. So, it would fail to build. So this is all functionality that is available for you. So once you set the properties, then after you've done your development work, you're probably wanting to deploy this result to some staging or production environment. So the options there after you've built are, and of course you can run the code analysis, is to publish. So when you publish, you set the target database name, so you can just go in there and connect to anything including SQL Azure. You set the database name, the script name. You can optionally register it as a data tier application. You can block publish when database has drifted from a registered version. You have a number of features in the advanced tier as well. Drop and recreate, so on and so forth. And you can see again, advanced deployment options. So pretty sophisticated in the level of configuration available. You also have this ability to save connection information as a profile. So if you don't want to be entering it all the time, and then you can load that profile. So once you configure this, you create the profile and you save it, and then you can load profiles. Notice you can also always generate a script. So let's say I wanted to deploy this, and I wanted to deploy it back as books copy. Then I say OK, and notice I could create this as a profile, and then I could save the profile as, and there, save it, and I'm just going to overwrite it because I did it once, and then I can generate a script, or I can publish, and then this is publishing this back out. Now this is schema only, this is not data. And now if I wanted to check, I could also go over here and I could use my SQL Server Object Explorer, and I could do a refresh and look on my server, and I could see that I have my books copy, and there it is. In that demo, I took a look at working with SQL Server. In the next demo, I'm going to take a look at working with SQL Azure. So in this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to work with SSDT and SQL Azure. So what I have done is I have created a SQL Azure instance in the Windows Azure portal, and here it is online. And inside of here, I have two databases. So if I want, I can look at my server. So there's my server. And then I could create a database or look at the databases here as well. And here it takes me back to the first section. So here's the books database that I pushed up earlier. Now interestingly, if I wanted to add a database, I can just click here and add a blank new database. One thing that I have found working with customers is really the metaphor for backing up and restoring, if you will, is import and export. So if I wanted to take this books database, and do I have data in it? I think I do. Yeah, okay, and then I wanted to export it. Notice it would export out to this blob storage, and I'll just put it out into here, and it will export it as a BACPAC file. And then now it is being exported, you can see there. Now while that's happening, let me go back over to the top level. At the level of the server, if I wanted to work with that BACPAC file or any BACPAC file, then I would get a BACPAC URL, select my account, select my container, and there it is, and then open, and then choose my server, and then import that back in. Now if I wanted advanced database settings, I have that available as well, but I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to say OK, and then that's going to bring that back in. So you can see this idea of working with BACPACs is pretty key to working with SQL Azure. Now in addition to that, one of the development challenges, as I showed in the previous demonstration, is that SQL Azure has some feature differences from on-premise SQL Server, whether it's 2008, 2012, whatever. So if you are, like most developers, developing on-prem and then you want to push a copy of your database up to Azure, this feature that I showed earlier of version targeting inside of Visual Studio, where you can go to the project settings and set your target platform from whatever you are working at on-prem to Windows Azure SQL Database, is quite useful. Of course, if you want to publish, all you have to do is right-click and go to Publish, and then rather than putting in an on-prem version, you can push to SQL Azure. So I showed you quite a few of the enhancements, but probably not all of them. So I have them all screenshotted here, and I might jump back and show them to you if I've missed. So I showed you the new table designer, how it stays in sync and has the most common tasks to the right. I showed you the offline projects, where you have this offline copy of your schema of SQL Server. I did not show you add database reference, so that's pretty self-explanatory from the screenshot. You can just right-click and add a reference to an existing DACPAC. Again, one of the things I hope you take away from this presentation is the prevalence of DACPACs throughout these Microsoft tools. I did show you the schema compare and how, depending on what is being connected, you'll have the option either to generate a script or directly update the target. One thing I didn't show you, but you can see by the filter, and this is an older version, you can filter. So for example, if you only wanted to bring up the differences in, let's say, users, and you weren't concerned with the differences in tables, you could create a script that is a subset. One thing I didn't show you the refactoring. Let me jump back and show you that, because that's really kind of interesting. So let me go to a more interesting database that has more dependencies. I'll do AdventureWorks, and I'm going to create a new project, and I'll just call this AdventureWorks copy, and I will create that DACPAC again, and then I'll click Finish. Now inside of here, if I want to make a change within the Sales LT schema rather than the DBO schema, there's probably a lot of dependencies. And it's always a nerve-wracking thing. So one of the great aspects of these tools is you have the type of refactoring support built in that we're used to in regular application code. So for example, if I want to change the, I'll just pick something here, the name of this table, I can just right-click on it, and then I can get refactor. I'm going to select the first refactor. This is a bit tricky. See the second one? This is from having ReSharper. So the first refactor, I'm going to say rename. I'm going to say customer address 1 and preview changes and say OK. And it's going to show me here all the different references. See that? Really handy. So it's a great feature. Another thing that I forgot to show you that I'll show you once I'm in here is this new feature around data comparison. So I can compare the data from this instance, for example, of books to anything else that I might have. So I can compare the data as well as the schema. If you notice here, I can compare different records, only in source, only in target, identical, and say next. And I can say what it is I want to compare and finish. And I can see that I have differences in records. So I have, and here it shows me the actual differences in records. This is a really great feature that it's going to be super useful for lots of us. So this is a data compare, and it's so new I actually forgot to show you. So it's over here on the left side, on the live side. Okay, I showed you the code analysis settings, I showed you the publishing, and I showed you the version targeting. I just finished showing you around software development lifecycle for databases. Of course, the second set of functionality is around BIDS, or the replacement for the Business Intelligence Development Studio. And not everybody will use that, but I'll just give you a quick demo on what that looks like as well. So to use those features, you would say File, New, Project, and Business Intelligence. Now, if you have the Object Explorer, but you don't have the Business Intelligence, remember you have to download that separately. Very confusing for people, but I did provide the links in the deck earlier. And here you can make SSAS cubes or tabular models. You can make integration services projects. or SSRS reports. So I don't have any of this functionality installed, so I can't deploy any of this. So let's give it a try. And here, yeah, indeed, it says I have to select an analysis services instance, and I don't have one. So I can't actually create this at all because I just have SQL Express. So you still have to have an engine to run it against that you have to connect to. So that's another part of this. So again, same thing if I go here and I say, okay, I'm going to create some reports. I don't remember if I installed reports or not on here. I'll find out. So here I can create reports. So I would just be creating a new report. And let me try SSIS just for completeness here. For integration services, you can create. Can you? Let's see. I want to just make sure. Let me just do something really simple. So I'm going to drag on a data profiling task and just edit that because it's quick. And I will make a connection here and I will do a quick profile to one of my tables here. And then I will see if this will run. That's kind of cool. So I was able to create a package even though I only have SQL Express installed on here. So that's kind of useful. Okay, so that's a very quick look at the business intelligence capabilities. You have to have a an analysis services instance to make tabular models or cubes. You can create reports even without reporting services, and you can create and test SSIS packages. So that's cool. There are alternatives to SSDT. They're great products, and I've used them with a lot of customers, but I just wanted to make this screencast because I find that SSDT the price is right for a lot of my customers. So, you know, if you need even more functionality than what I showed you here, you want to take a look at some of the Redgate tools, Toad for SQL Server or IDERA SQL Comparison. Those are even more, have more features and functions, but they have license fees. So, if you've stuck with me this long, hopefully you're going to try this thing out. So to get ready to work with it, you're going to have to determine which versions of SQL Server you're going to have on your environment. That's less important because it works with 2005 on up to 2012. Don't think it works with the 2014 preview. Don't know. And importantly, which version of Visual Studio. Now, you actually don't have to have Visual Studio. I didn't mention that earlier because if you don't have Visual Studio, you can just download the tools, which also is really handy. If you do, it'll just come in as a template. But you know, there's three parts and pieces. There's the core functionality. There's so that's the lifecycle stuff. There's the bids functionality, and then there's the DACFX stuff, which I didn't show in much detail. I just talked about, frankly, because it's just come out and I haven't spent a lot of time with it. But it's extensible hooks into the DAC framework. So download all the parts. Get used to these DACPACs. And take a look at BACPACs if you're working with SQL Azure, because this is really key and core to the database lifecycle functionality management in the Microsoft tools. Try out the BI functionality and then stay up to date on this on the SSDT team blog. That's the most recent information, most current information about it. So before I end this out, if you've listened this long, one other thing I want to mention is, in addition to my work as a professional big data architect and trainer, I run a nonprofit to teach children to program. So our core offering is free courseware and online training for teachers. So we have free lessons in Java, Microsoft Small Basic. We also have a set for Microsoft developers, really, rather than teachers, on C# on Pluralsight, which is actually free. You don't even have to have a Pluralsight subscription under Teaching Kids Programming. So, you know, teach your kids to program because they're not having that opportunity in school. Really super important. And to that end, Microsoft actually nominated us, along with many other wonderful charities, to potentially win up to $50,000 to help grow TKP. So if you have a minute, try out our courseware, and if you like it, go to azuredevs.com and vote before October 31st, because it's basically the highest number of votes gets the most money. So you can see, as of today, we are on the leaderboard, so we would like to stay there. So thanks in advance for that. So to end out, if you like this, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel, write comments. I am really focusing on growing my YouTube audience, and I'm providing as high a quality technical information as I can come up with. Follow me on Twitter. Of course, I've written a few books there. And if you think that my company would benefit from your services, you can reach out to me this way and we'll go from there. Thank you very much. This is Lynn Langit for All Things Data.